Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and we're back here again recapping what was a really close game. And honestly, I was starting to think they were going to win this thing. Jacksonville falls 30 to 27 against Green Bay in Jacksonville. Close competition. Green Bay did lead most of this game, but the Jaguars showed some fight late in this one. They got the lead in the third quarter. Things went south pretty quickly after, but Trevor Lawrence, playing good football at the end of this game after what was a really bad play, to be fair, in the fumble in his own red zone, and just wasn't enough, right? And for him, like, you get down the field, you get tied 27-27, you can't control what the defense does in the situation. And what they did was collapse. There's no other word that's better to describe it. It's simply a collapse. What they did at the end of that game, just getting torched by Malik Willis, a player that last year we would be looking at him and saying this guy's never even scored a touchdown in the NFL passing. It's not good, right? Like, this is not good stuff for the defense. But it was an interesting game, and I felt like Jacksonville would probably put up a bit of a fight. I didn't think they would just come into this to crumble and die, but I was a little impressed. I was impressed with what the offense did later on in the game, how Trevor was able to take control. But at the end of the day, the problems are still right. So, with that all said, we're going to get into the individual performances. We'll talk a little bit about the general situation. But guys, I'm not going to lie to you, right? This team, there's not a whole lot to talk about every week that's new. It's the same kind of things over and over, right? And sure, like, we'll talk about injuries. That was a big thing in this game. A lot of players went down, but at the end of the day, we're sort of in this, not necessarily a transitionary period yet, but we're coming upon that where it's really just a matter of time until things change. Whether or not that's the whole slate getting cleaned, a head coach getting fired, a defensive coordinator tomorrow, or the GM or whatever it might be, right? We simply don't know what extent it'll be yet, but we know that change is going to come for this team. They're 2-6. They aren't going to make the playoffs at this point without some incredible run, under which, if they did, they would absolutely have earned their spot in the playoffs, because what it would take to win this many games against this schedule, it would be nothing short of what you would expect out of a contender. So I'm just being honest, right? We're going to talk about a lot of the same kind of stuff here. But getting into individual performances, this was a questionable game at points for Trevor Lawrence. But ultimately, we're still in the same spot where we can thankfully watch these games and say that he's not the problem, right? And we go back to what I've said this season, what I've said this offseason. This year, to me, was always about getting answers to the big questions about your quarterback, your head coach, your GM. Are they the future? It's pretty clear with the head coach and GM. It almost was before the season, you could argue. But the quarterback, we're getting to the right side of that, right? Even if the decision's already made, you obviously want to see the rewards of it. And Lawrence is playing good football. It isn't great. It isn't elite, but it's good football. And it's not really something I'm going to look at and say, there's the problem, right? First 4 weeks, sure, that's where we were. He was not playing well. He didn't have volume in his games. He wasn't putting up big performances. He had a lot of turnover worthy plays. He was not accurate. A lot of things have changed since then. And that's what's important at the end of the day. So, another 300-yard game from him is great. So many of these yards coming from that final drive with a lot of players on the field that were not starters, right? This team lost Brian Thomas Jr. We'll see what the injury is there and if he misses any time. They lost Christian Kirk on what looks like a really big injury. And then they lost, apparently, Evan Ingram towards the end of that game, or he was not on the field or something of that regard. I know a lot of people have been throwing around that 3 people were out. And Gabe Davis seemed like he was healthy still. And a lot of passes were going straight his way. So something might be up there. But Lawrence was still able to rally this team at the end of the game and have that big moment. Even if it's not a win, That's all he could do. And so, am I going to look at this and be disappointed? Not so much. The sack and fumble was obviously really bad, but those plays are going to happen sometimes, right? And the interception seemed like a miscommunication. It wasn't a great decision, but the guy he threw the pick to, I mean, keep in mind, like, may not have known his name as much last year, but Xavier McKinney is one of the best safeties in the NFL. The way he plays, how he's able to force turnovers. I mean, this is something he does every game against pretty much every quarterback he goes up against. So, doesn't make it okay, but it's not as big of an issue as what you would normally say. So, overall, like, I'm fine with the way Lawrence played. There's room for improvement, but this isn't really where you're finding your problem. Now, the rushing game, Tank Bigsby taking on pretty much all the carries. Travis Etienne did not play. At this point, I think it's pretty clear that Etienne's probably getting dealt. Probably trying to get him healthy, and they feel fine about the way they're playing. So, I mean, as far as the running, right? They feel good about what Tank Bigsby's doing. They're not worried about, are we going to struggle a ton if Travis Etienne's not on the field? We've talked about why that is, that Etienne hasn't played well this year, or the struggles with the scheme and the way he runs. We've had that discussion, but it makes sense for Bigsby to have these carries. They kind of struggled early on in the game. Wasn't a good start for the running attack, but started to get going later. Bigsby he brings some physicality to this game that this team that they've been missing, right? I saw a play, I can't remember who it was, but he decleats it. Just running through contact, bulldozing players. I feel like the way he plays gets the offensive line fired up and gets the offensive line playing much more physical than they're used to. We have not seen that from the Jaguars, and we still need to see a lot more. But Bigsby brings a good element there that you do want to see with the team. So, overall, like, it's not an incredible day, but it's at least a pretty good performance and a pretty good finish to the day and a good amount of yards on the ground. Now, in the receiving game, a lot of guys getting involved here. Parker Washington was out on the field a lot. He had a nice catch earlier on in the game and then got involved in the final drive, I believe, as well. It's good to see that. He has not played a ton this year or been a target that much this year. He's going to have to step up. I would imagine Christian Kirk at least misses some time. So you want to see Parker Washington be able to do that. And I think he's going to have his opportunity, and I think that he could do well in that opportunity. Brennan Strange, he's been playing fine. I really have not had a whole lot of concerns about him. Now, do I think he's an incredible player? No, I'm not there, but he's been playing much better this year, and it's something that you have to see from him as a second-round pick. Brian Thomas Jr., they went to him a few times in this game, but 3 receptions isn't enough, right? Early on in this game, they weren't stretching the field vertically. They weren't throwing down the field, and it just makes them really predictable. And once they started doing that, suddenly everything started working, late in that second quarter and on. And so, it's still another good game from Brian Thomas Jr. Obviously, the injury sucks. We'll see how big of a deal that is. But he played well. It's another good performance. Now, there was some miscommunication going on with routes. At one point, I think that has to be noted. This is an area where, if you go back to training camp, as much as we talk about him as this awesome young player, which he is, there's still areas that he's growing. And there were areas that were concerns coming into the NFL where he's still improving. Route running is one of those areas. It's something that you could see the improvement on the field, but there's times where it's just not good enough. He doesn't have the nuance of some of the best players. Sometimes he's out of position. Things like that can happen, right? And that's all going to get better over time. BTJ has the mentality to improve those things. It's really just a waiting game at this point because he's grown so much already since getting into the NFL. But those issues are still there, and there's something that we'll have to watch a little bit because miscommunications seem to be relatively prevalent today. Christian Kirk, as well. Obviously, we know there's a big injury there, but he was having a pretty good game. had an opportunity for a huge catch on the play he went down on, ended up dropping it. It was a difficult catch, to be fair, but it's just been hard to watch, you know? Like, there's been a lot of drives, a lot of moments that are getting killed because of these drops, and Kirk has been a relatively big part of that for the Jaguars. Now, I'll talk about offensive line for a moment, really quick. Obviously, they're not listed here, but the offensive line played pretty well today. They didn't start out great per se, but they ended up holding up in protection as the game went on. They were doing fine in the run blocking. They got physical later on in the game. They did the things that you want to see. And when they were doing that, the offense was functioning really well. Now, the big loss, of course, was Brandon Scherf going down. I do not know if he came back into the game. I'm not sure if this is really a big injury either. We've seen Scherf go down in a lot of moments and just end up either coming back later in the game or just being there next week. Right? I don't know if he's actually even missed a game for Jacksonville in his time here. He's just had a lot of small injuries that have taken him out for snaps in a matchup. But that's going to be something to monitor because that is a big loss. That was a player that was going to be on the trade block as well. There was a lot of talk from that. There's even NFL articles from NFL.com about it. And then, same for Christian Kirk as well, you can note, because this team's 2-6. If he's not a part of the future, you'd have to make your move. But we got to see what the injury is. And this really changes things if these players are hurt. So, really rough day for Jacksonville in that regard as well. Now, getting to the defense, I mean, I'm not going to get too specific here. It's a lot of the same stuff, right? Now, was good to see Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker get their sack later on in the game. There's nothing else here, though, right? And you got Mason Smith getting sad again. You just don't have the pressure you need. And it allowed Malik Willis to play pretty well. It allowed Jordan Love, after he, got off platform, threw it, got hurt, to stay in the game for a while because he wasn't getting hurt that much. The hit that it took for Jordan Love to get out of the game was just a little bump after a play. It wasn't a big hit or anything. So you think, they were not that far away from being able to get him out of the competition, which, not that you want to hurt him, but you're not going to avoid sacking him because he chooses to play injured, right? It's not going to stop you. You have to do your job. So they just didn't do enough, right? Pass rush wasn't good enough. The run defense was kind of back and forth. The secondary, you had some great moments from Tyson Campbell. He is, I think, at this point, pretty clearly the best player in the secondary. Between him and Cisco, I think that's become very apparent at this point. And he's been very missed for this team. But outside of that, Monteric Brown, there's limits to what he can do. I love him as a player. I want Jacksonville to keep him around. I think he can be a guy who comes in, starts, when Campbell goes down. He's obviously had a lot of injuries. But that's not your ideal starter. Ronald Darby went down early in this contest, I believe. That forced Brown on the field a lot more. You had Jarion Jones out there, too, who had a great play, by the way. Had a phenomenal moment where he got a pick. It was really impressive as well. So shout out to him. He deserves that. But there are just moments where they're getting burned, right? Final drive, Jaden Reed taking it 50 yards down the field. It's just wide open. I don't get those moments. I don't get what they're doing. I don't know why the defense is like this. It's hard to explain, right? Because this is not the stuff that Ryan Nielsen was showing on film with Atlanta or in New Orleans or any of that. And they're completely different than anything you would have expected out of his defense. And I wonder if that's a problem with Ryan Nielsen or a problem with him coming into a situation that was very bad and just not being able to really control his defense and have proper command over it. I wonder, because I can imagine it going either way. I could see him just being an assistant coach for a long time after this. I can imagine him getting back as a defensive coordinator somewhere and doing well in a good situation. Who knows? I mean, no one wants to hear that last part, obviously, right now with how bad Jacksonville's defense has been. It's just beyond me. And shout out, of course, to Cam Little making his kicks. in this game. He's a big part of this. Logan Cook had some phenomenal punts as well. That stuff does matter. I mean, we almost got a field goal off of it early in the game because we were starting to drive at like the 50-yard line just because we won the punt battle. So, not that you want to be in those situations, but they're doing well at that at least. Now, just my overall thoughts on this loss. I didn't watch a ton of post-game press conferences. At this point, it's just kind of the same old same, right? They don't have answers. They don't know how to fix the problems. Really, the only way they can fix the problems is if Lawrence has these brilliant moments, if they get lucky, or if they're playing a terrible football team. The last time that we beat a good football team was last year. I believe it was week 12 against the Houston Texans on the road. It's a long time ago. We weren't winning big games at home in 2023 as well. I could probably go back and look at the schedule. I'll actually do this really quick. And you kind of wonder why the stadium's getting packed by other teams. Like, they don't reward the fans at home. We go back to 2023 here. You got your preseason games. Lose to the Chiefs at home, right? Lose to the Texans at home. They're in London for these games. So this wasn't even a home win, really. They beat the Colts at home. They have that one win every year. After that, destroyed by the 49ers. They did beat the Titans, another bad team. And then from that point on, it was the Panthers, 26-0. Just when they play anyone who's not trash at home, they lose the game. I don't get why, but that's just what they are right now. I will give you guys a quick look at PFF here, just because they do have information out on grades from the game. This will be updated, though. Once they get to tomorrow, they'll go back through all this, but just to see some quick grades here. Good game from Brandon Scherf, Ezra Cleveland as well, and Anton Harrison had a good game in the pass blocking department. And on the defensive side, sorry, trying to avoid coughing. I've had this cough for like a month now. Devin Lloyd, another good game. Jarion Jones, names that make sense here. Jordan Jefferson, also someone we don't talk about, but had a good performance. But kind of what you expect to see. I think Tyson did better than what he's given here. But overall, there's some good individual performances. It's the question of what they do as a team. So, what do we do from here, right? I mean, at some point, people are going to get fired. That's the step we're waiting on right now. There's no turning this season around at this point. I think if they won today, you could maybe talk about that. They'd be 3-5. They'd have momentum. I think they could beat the Minnesota team. I think that, facing the Eagles next week, the Eagles have struggled. I don't think they're as good as they've been before. You could have maybe ran some of these games over the next couple of weeks. They would have been hard, but Jacksonville could have had a shot. But they don't. They're 2-6. They got to play those opponents. They got to play the Lions. They got to play the Texans. You have to get through those games, winning at least 2. Because if you don't win 2 of them, you have a losing record no matter what. Because we're 2-6. The most losses you can have is 8 to even have a chance. You're not making it 8-9. Your division's too good for that. I just don't think they would even get to 4-9, honestly, and be able to run the table with easy games at the end of the season. And it does look easy. That's the good thing. But this just isn't a good team, right? It should be. There's a lot of talent here. Talent's being wasted. And it's going to be time for a change. It'll be interesting to see when people get fired, how they go about it. I will say this right now, and I don't have any inside sources or anything, so this is just purely my guess. But I do think at this point there could be a chance that the defensive coordinator gets fired before the head coach does. At this point, just with the way things are going. Maybe not, just given that Nielsen was Balky's pick. Balky seems to be winning the power battle. Not that either of them will have any power in a couple months if they're both fired. But I think that could be something to watch for just with how bad the defense has been. Maybe they try to make a move. Maybe Shad Khan forces that. I mean, if he just watches highlights from this game, I think that might be a way he sees it. Um, I don't think Doug's fired tomorrow. I don't think Trent's fired. I do think Trent will be gone. It's hard to imagine him staying. I don't know who would come coach this team if he stayed. We'd be talking about Bill O'Brien at that point, Bill Belichick, who would probably go to any other organization instead, as in like Raiders. He might want to go to a Tom Brady or Philadelphia, places like that. If they're hiring Dallas, it's hard for me to imagine that working out. I think it would be a disaster for Jacksonville if they tried to keep Trent Ball. I don't think it's an option. I think at this point, it's pretty clear Doug is toast. I don't think he's going to be around much longer. I just don't think they're going to fire him after this game. So we'll see what happens. But guys, it's just a matter of time. It's going to be a lot of the same stuff we're going to be saying until change comes. This is where we are. You just got to bide your time, and eventually, thank God, we'll be in the off season. We'll hopefully get a good head coach. We'll hopefully get a good GM. Cross your fingers about that. Cross your fingers that a Ben Johnson wants to come here. I hope to God that is the case. And we can maybe get excited about that if we get a young, exciting coach that has not just been fired from another team that we're going to bring in. Maybe there will be some reason for excitement. But we'll have to see what happens. So that's all I've got. I appreciate you guys watching this. Want to shout out. Oh, sorry. Go to the right thing here. Want to shout out our channel members. We got Premier and Seer 904 in our 2-week die rank. Mr. Dolphin from On the Prowl. And Scrubber Ducky 500 from Be Well Faithful. You guys are welcome to join this if you want. It's not required ever. I'm not going to ever force you to do it. Obviously, I can anyway. But it's just a way to help out if you want to and support the channel. It'd be cool to get some people on, but I appreciate everyone who's doing it right now. It's been a lot of fun. And we'll have to have a live stream here sometime soon. It's been a little while. Maybe whenever we have a fire. That's my plan right now. But that's all I've got. I appreciate y'all for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.